Welcome to Hangar 51 Files, where history's secrets, classified operations, and hidden truths come to light. From Cold War black ops to the future of warfare, from lost artifacts to emerging defense technologies, we investigate the stories buried beneath official narratives. No speculation, no clickbait, just hard-hitting research, expert analysis, and the pursuit of truth. You're now inside the briefing room. Stay sharp, stay curious. This is Hangar 51 Files.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a truly fascinating and sometimes pretty troubling piece of Cold War history.
We're looking at those secret stay-behind armies that were operating across Western Europe.
Often linked to NATO, the CIA. It gets complicated. We know you want the key info without getting totally bogged down, and that's the plan.
Yeah, and our main source here is Dr. Danielle Ganser's research, the work on Gladio. Plus, there's a European Parliament resolution from 1990 that kind of blew the lid off things a bit.
Right, so these give us a pretty good picture, even if parts are still, murky.
Definitely obscured in places, yeah.
So the mission for you, learner, is to really get the core insights. Why were these armies set up? Who was in them?
And the controversies, which are significant, what their actions actually involved, and what it all means looking back.
Exactly. Expect some surprising stuff. Hopefully you'll come away with a much clearer view of this hidden history.
Okay, so where do we start? The origins, I suppose?
Yeah, let's do that. What actually sparked these operations?
Well, it really goes back to right after World War II. There was this huge, pervasive fear in Western Europe.
Of Soviet invasion.
Soviet invasion, absolutely. And also just communist influence growing within these countries, Italy, France, places like that.
Okay, so that intense fear was the breeding ground.
It really was. And it created this environment where, secret networks could seem like a necessary evil, almost.
Even if they push the boundaries of democracy.
That's the core tension right there,
Yeah.
the perceived threat versus democratic principles.
So who kicked things off? You mentioned the CIA.
Yeah, early on it was MI6, British intelligence, and the CIA. They were instrumental in setting up these initial networks.
And the concept was stay behind.
Exactly. The idea was if the Soviets did invade and occupy a country, you'd already have these secret cells in place.
Ready to do what? Sabotage?
Yeah.
Gather intel?
All of the above. Intelligence, sabotage, organizing local resistance, preparing for the worst-case scenario, basically.
A hidden defense layer. But it sounds like maybe their job description expanded a bit beyond just invasion prep.
It certainly seems that way. Our sources, like Delatise's research, point to secret NATO protocols.
Secret protocols, what do they say?
Well, allegedly, they required member states to set up these clandestine security bodies specifically to fight communism internally.
Internally, so not just foreign threats.
Right. Delatize suggests Italy, when joining NATO, signed these secret add-ons. They basically set up an unofficial group to keep Italy aligned with the West.
Even if Italians voted differently, like if they elected a left-wing government?
That's the implication, that this network could somehow counteract democratic outcomes if they weren't convenient for the Western powers.
Wow, that's quite something.
And Kugler apparently confirmed these secret protocols existed too. There was even a former NATO intelligence official who claimed they protected right-wing extremists.
Protected them. Why?
Because they were seen as useful assets against communism. There's also that alleged secret deal between Truman and Adenauer for West Germany joining NATO.
Oh, what's that about?
Supposedly, they agreed not to go after known right-wing extremists too aggressively. Again, the anti-communist goal seemingly trumping other concerns.
It paints a picture of something really hidden, really far-reaching.
Mm-hmm.
How did they keep it all secret? How was it structured?
Secrecy was everything. They used layers of command structures, lots of acronyms like ACC, CPC, TMB.
Right.
Often these involved cooperation between countries, like the UK, US, and the Netherlands had one, TCH. The UK and France worked together too.
And WCC. The Western Union Clandestine Committee.
Yeah, another coordinating body. So it wasn't just isolated national efforts. It was definitely coordinated across Western Europe.
A network, really.
Absolutely. And there's talk of a directive shape, maybe a kind of standard doctrine for all these allied stay-behind groups.
Standardizing training, communication, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Unifying how they operated. But within each country, the key was the need-to-know principle.
Right. Compartmentalization. You only know your little piece of the puzzle.
Precisely. In Belgium's group, STC Mob, instructors apparently didn't even know who each other's agents were. Extreme secrecy.
Incredible. But who was actually in charge? Was there any real oversight?
That's where it gets murky. The European Parliament resolution definitely flagged the lack of democratic control as a huge issue.
And getting info now is still hard.
It seems so. Gantzer mentions the CIA still being reluctant to release stuff, using FOIA exemptions for national security. It suggests it's all still very sensitive.
Okay, so this secret international network, born out of Cold War fear. Let's zoom in. Italy seems key, right? Where Gladio came from.
Italy is crucial, and yeah, a really troubling case study. The CIA was involved there super early, even before Gladio was formally set up.
How so?
The 1948 election. Big fight between the Christian Democrats and the Communists. The CIA poured money into the Christian Democrats, the DCI.
And ran smear campaigns.
Yeah, extensively, to stop the communists winning. So right away, you see this pattern of covert interference in Italian politics.
So not just planning for invasion, but actively shaping who governed Italy.
Exactly. Then later, CFAR, Italian military intelligence, worked really closely with the CIA and NATO to set up and train Gladio units.
There's a letter from General Broccoli in 51.
Yeah, mentioning training in Britain, weapons from the CIA. But there were also worries inside CFAR about becoming, too dependent on the U.S.
Relying too much on Uncle Sam.
Kind of. But it shows how openly foreign powers were involved in Italy's security setup.
And it wasn't just military guys, right? The sources mentioned some less reputable characters being involved.
Yes, that's a big point. Right-wing extremists were part of it, including Prince Valerio Borghese.
Borghese, the fascist leader.
The very same. He had connections to the CIA's James Angleton, which raises huge questions about who they were recruiting and, frankly, the ideology driving parts of this network.
Blurring the lines between security and, well, extremist politics.
Definitely. And Borghese was involved in coup attempts, wasn't he?
He was. Piano solo in 1964. That was a plan, directed by General De Lorenzo, using Gladio soldiers.
What was the plan?
To bomb DCI offices, newspapers, and then blame it on the left wing. Frame them.
A false flag operation.
Exactly. And then in 1970, Operation Tora, another right-wing coup attempt with Borghese, maybe even U.S. and NATO ships involved.
It just shows how dangerous these secret armies could be domestically, way beyond fighting Soviets.
Yeah, the risk of them turning against democracy itself.
That's the inherent danger. Secret, unaccountable forces.
And Italy had huge problems with political violence then, both left and right wing.
It did. The Red Brigades on the left, for sure. But the sources highlight a difference in tactics with the extreme right, like Ordine Nuovo, which had links to Gladio.
How so?
Their terror seemed aimed at creating mass fear. Indiscriminate bombings, like Piazza Fontana in '69.
And then blaming the communists.
That was the tactic. False flag again. The military secret service apparently covered up who was really behind Piazza Fontana, using terror to manipulate politics.
Just deeply disturbing. So these weren't just passive defense units. They were potentially involved in actual terrorism inside Italy.
That's the allegation, and there's significant evidence pointing that way.
What did the Italian government say when this started coming out?
Well, Prime Minister Andreotti initially denied Gladio was still active, flat out denied it.
But the press found out otherwise.
Yeah, the press revealed it was still going long after it was supposedly shut down in '72. So Andreotti was forced to admit it to Parliament in 1990.
And he admitted U.S. involvement.
He did. He admitted its existence and implicated the U.S. and other Western European governments. His strategy seemed to be, look, everyone was doing it.
Spread the blame. So Italy opened the floodgates. What about other countries? The Netherlands.
In the Netherlands, yeah, Prime Minister Lubbers confirmed they had a secret army in late 1990. Sent a letter to Parliament.
Did he say NATO ran it?
No, he stressed it wasn't under direct NATO supervision. National control, basically. They had a closed-door briefing for the Intelligence Committee.
But no big public investigation.
No. Parliamentarians were concerned, obviously. A secret army operating without their knowledge. But they decided against a full inquiry or a public report.
They're just quiet.
Pretty much. An opposition figure, Hans Dextal, said Parliament was never told. There was also talk of an independent O branch, maybe part funded privately and by the CIA, and Dutch soldiers trained in Sicily at the Italian Gladio HQ.
So acknowledgement, but limited transparency. What about Belgium? The outline mentioned some really serious stuff there.
Belgium is definitely controversial. Their secret army, SDR-8 or STC Mob, also came to light in 1990.
And they worked closely with the official police.
Yeah, the gendarmerie. Used their helicopters for missions, things like that. And like elsewhere, the soldiers were strongly anti-communist, trained with British and U.S. officers.
Okay, but then Fielsom, 1984. That sounds bad.
The Fielsom incident, yeah. It involved U.S. Marines and a Belgian agent during an exercise called Oosling, A Belgian officer was killed.
Killed.
Details are murky, but weapons were also stolen from a police station nearby, and possibly planted later on a Belgian communist group.
Planted evidence. And was SDR-8 involved?
Accounts conflict on their exact role in the exercise, but it raises huge questions about oversight, misuse of force, lethal outcomes.
And cover-ups, potentially.
That's the implication. A training exercise gone fatally wrong, followed by manipulation.
And then the Brabant massacres. Those horrific supermarket raids in the 80s. Unsolved, right?
Brutal, terrifying, and unsolved. They caused immense fear. A Belgian parliamentary report actually suggested the killers might include former security forces.
Former police or military?
And extreme right-wingers. Possibly part of a plot to destabilize the country, maybe pave the way for a right-wing coup.
A strategy of tension, like in Italy.
Exactly. Vincenzo Vinciguerra, the Italian terrorist, claimed right-wing groups across Europe were being mobilized by the state, by NATO, as part of this anti-communist strategy.
And there was that coded message. Adolf is looking well.
Yeah, that cryptic message fueled suspicions, led to resignations high up in the security services. Belgium eventually shut down its secret army in late 1990.
And Paulutinus, a right-wing terrorist linked to U.S. intelligence and NATO.
His name has been connected to the Brabant massacres, too. It just points towards this really disturbing possibility of state-linked elements and extremists involved in domestic terror.
A very dark picture in Belgium. What about France? Big NATO country, strong communist party after the war.
France is interesting, yeah. Strong communist influence post-war. The U.S. was active early on trying to curb that. They helped get communist ministers kicked out of the government in 1947.
And a secret right-wing army called Plan Bleu was exposed then, too.
It was, yeah. Then in 1952, the U.S. Joint Chiefs had this directive, Operation Demagnetize?
Demagnetize? What was that?
Yeah. Aimed at weakening communist support in France and Italy, using political pressure, paramilitary ops, psychological warfare.
And the French and Italian governments didn't even know.
Apparently not. It shows how proactive the U.S. was in trying to shape the politics of its allies, sometimes without telling them.
And the rumor about a coup attempt against de Gaulle. CIA involved?
There are allegations, yeah. Supposedly because he was changing France's relationship with NATO in 1961. After the Algerian crisis, the French stay-behind structure was reformed, maybe hidden within the Service d'Action Civique, the SAC.
So potential plots, even against allied leaders if they stepped out of line.
That's the suggestion. High-stakes, covert actions.
Spain had a very different history with the Civil War. How did stay-behind manifest there?
Right. The anti-communism was much more open and brutal during the Civil War, but after Franco died, suspicions grew that Spain had become a major Gladio base.
A haven for neo-fascists.
Potentially. A former Spanish military colonel later confirmed Gladio-type structures and training during Franco's role with U.S. instructors.
So it was operating under the dictatorship.
Seems so. The government initially denied it, but there might have been a quiet internal investigation later. It shows how authoritarian regimes could be folded into these networks.
And Portugal, also under dictatorship for a long time.
Portugal hosted a Jinter Press in Lisbon, which sounds like a news agency, but wasn't.
What was it then?
It was basically a CIA-backed training center for right-wing terrorists, specializing in dirty tricks, false flag operations to blame communists.
Run by a Frenchman.
Yeah.
Yves Guérin-Serac.
Yeah, a former French officer decorated by the U.S. military. Their whole strategy was create chaos, blame the left. They even infiltrated left-wing groups to stir up trouble.
Using covert groups to actively cause violence and deceive the public.
Exactly. Deceptive, manipulative tactics.
Okay, let's swing north. Scandinavia, Denmark and Norway.
Denmark had Absalon, set up after World War II, involved former resistance fighters, possibly links to Opus Dei, the Catholic group.
Did the CIA confirm it?
Well, CIA Director Colby was cagey at first, but eventually confirmed a key contact, Ebbe Monk. Absalon had its own weapons caches, did NATO exercises, and even ran intel ops into Eastern Europe.
And Norway.
Norway worked closely with MI6 and the CIA very early on to set theirs up. Operation Saturn, later called Rocambole or ROC,
focused on sabotage and guerrilla warfare if occupied.
Yeah, small decentralized groups, secret arms dumps, ready for Soviet occupation. So in Scandinavia, it seems quite focused on that original stay-behind mission, though still with heavy foreign intel involvement.
Germany is obviously a huge piece here, given its history. Nazism, then the front line of the Cold War.
Hugely significant. After the war, you had the Gehlen Organization, lots of former Nazi intelligence officers working closely with the U.S., with guys like Frank Wisner.
And there was a scandal early on, Bund Deutscher Jugend.
Yeah, early 50s. A right-wing youth group in Hesse, secretly backed by the CIA as a potential stay-behind force. The state prime minister didn't even know. Shows the lack of oversight.
Then the Lemke affair in '81. Arms cache is found.
Linked to a right-wing extremist, alleged neo-Nazi ties, the government initially tried to downplay any Gladio connection.
And the Harpoon radio system. Developed in Germany.
Yes, by a German firm for NATO's ACC. Used to link stay-behind networks across Europe. Shows the technical coordination.
Even the East German Stasi knew about the West German network.
They did. They called them rollover agents and saw them as a threat. So despite denials in 1990, the German government finally admitted having a NATO-linked stay-behind unit in the BND, their intelligence service.
And said they were shutting it down.
Said it was being dissolved, and they'd told the Parliamentary Watchdog Committee. It's a complex picture, using ex-Nazis, secrecy, coordination, denial, eventual admission.
Okay, last pair. Greece and Turkey, NATO's southern flank, strategically vital.
Very important. In Greece, the British and then the CIA-backed right-wing secret armies, the Hellenic Raiding Force, LOK, formed way back in '44.
And LOK was part of the bigger Natosian network, Operation Sheepskin.
Yes, and it had a dual role, keeping control internally and stay behind if the Soviets invaded.
And LOK was involved in the 1967 coup.
Heavily involved in the military coup by the right-wing junta, the CIA was very close to the coup leader, Papadopoulos. This worried people even in the U.S. government, like Senator Metcalf.
So, direct involvement in overthrowing a government. What about Turkey?
Turkey's stay-behind, the counter-guerrilla, was largely staffed by the extreme right, specifically the National Action Party, MHP, and its youth wing, the Grey Wolves.
The Grey Wolves, a fascist group.
Yeah, ultranationalist, pan-Turkish ideology, history of violence. General Talat Turhan tried to expose counter-guerrilla as NATO's secret unit early on and was apparently tortured for it.
And suspicions of involvement in violence, like the Taksim Square massacre in '77.
Strong suspicions, yes. Prime Minister Ecevit raised concerns, but the military gave ambiguous answers. So in both Greece and Turkey, you see these secret units deeply tied to the far right and involved in major domestic political violence and upheaval.
Okay, so looking back at all this, across Europe, we land back at that core question. Prudent precaution or source of terror?
It's both, isn't it? The stated intention, the precaution against invasion, seems genuine, at least initially.
But the reality?
The reality, the dark side, is undeniable. Involvement in domestic politics, deep links with extremists, suspected roles in terrorism in Italy, Belgium. It diverged dangerously from the mission.
And the secrecy was the enabler.
Absolutely. That's the fundamental tension. You need secrecy for this kind of operation to work if occupied. But in a democracy, that level of secrecy, with no real oversight, it's toxic.
Senator Frank Church warned about that, right? Intelligence abuses stemming from institutional failures.
He did. And the European Parliament resolution hit the same points. Lack of democratic control, the potential for these groups to destabilize the very countries they were meant to protect.
A huge inherent danger.
Yeah, having unaccountable secret armies operating within your borders.
So for our listeners, what are the absolute key takeaways from this deep dive?
I think the main thing is realizing this hidden layer of the Cold War existed. It shows how intense the fear of communism was and the extreme secret lengths Western powers went to.
But with a really problematic legacy.
Deeply problematic. The links to undemocratic actions, to violence. It forces us to question the consequences of extreme state secrecy, even when the motives seem initially defensive.
And it definitely leaves us with a big question to chew on. Thinking about all this, what are the long-term effects of having such deep secrecy inside democratic states?
Yeah, how can societies actually ensure accountability when security operations stay hidden for decades? It's that constant, difficult balancing act.
Between security and transparency, security and democracy itself.
Exactly. And if people want to dig deeper, there's a lot more documented material out there on specific incidents, alleged Gladio terror links, and the ongoing debates about intelligence oversight.
It's a complex, often unsettling story, but one that really matters for understanding the Cold War and the challenges democracies still face.
That's it for this episode of Hangar 51 Files, where we uncover the hidden, investigate the unexplained, and challenge the official story. If you found this episode insightful, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with those who refuse to accept surface-level narratives. For more deep dives, exclusive research, and behind-the-scenes content, visit www.hanger51files.com, our YouTube channel, at Hanger51files, or our Substack, hanger51files.substack.com. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep questioning everything. This is Hanger51files signing off. No speculation, no clickbait, just hard-hitting research, expert analysis, and the pursuit of truth.